All right, guys. So once you have your underpainting completed, using neutral tones, going in and getting that full range of values with neutral tones, so that you start to get that sense of three-dimensionality, that sense of depth and space going back into your cardboard. Once you've got your underpainting completed, then it's time to go in and start thinking about your color scheme and the overpainting that you're going to do on top. So one of the main tricks that I've got to talk to you about concerning going in and doing overpainting is really making sure that, number one, you've got enough color. Whatever colors it is that you're using for your overpainting, you don't want to go crazy and and mix a boatload of color, but also at the same time, you don't want to have too little color, because if you run out of a particular color and then you go in and you start painting over the top and then you run out, then you've got to mix that color exactly, and that ends up turning into being quite the pain sometimes, especially if you're like me and you don't enjoy using colors directly out of the tube. I find that colors that are used out of the tube generally make a color palette that's boring and predictable. So having a little bit of variety from your color use, actually going in and color mixing to get specific tones, is real important. So when I'm looking at the underpainting that I have here, and you've got all of this smoky, misty effect going back in the back. This is going to be the section of my painting that is going to require the most amount of color and the most mixing to come through. So in my mind, I'm picturing like a really light, dirtyish pinkish or peachish color, a little bit of orange, but mostly a paled out white. So in order to get that tone, what I've done is I've taken my alizarin red and my bright yellow, I've mixed those together to get a real nice orange. I've cut a bunch of white into that orange, and then just the littlest bit of burnt umber into this to dirty it up. I actually want to dirty that up just a little bit more. So if you look at it, just the tiniest amount of pigment of that brown going into this brownish peachish color that I have here, because really what am I looking at? I want something dirty, I want something dark-ish, I want something a little muddy, but I also want it to be on the warm side. So what I'm doing here is this whole section is going to be the base tone that I'm going to be using for all of this smoke back in the background. You want to make sure that whatever color that you're using, if you look at it as, okay, I'm going to be using a lot of this color in this section, you always want to have a base tone mixed in and ready to go. From this base tone, I'm going to be able to go in, and as I apply this onto the cardboard, I'm going to be able to go in and I'm going to have to mix a little bit of white into this to get my highlights. I'm planning on going in and cutting some red into parts of this to get more of a darkish reddish color, and then I'm also going to mix in my ultramarine and my burnt umber to go and get those darkest shadows. With any sort of oil paint, or any paint really, whenever you're dealing with color shadows, you've got a color, and if it's a blue, if it's a green, if it's a red, whatever color it is that you're using, I really like that color combination of the burnt umber and the burnt sienna to create those dark values. Those are the exact same colors that I used to get these shadows coming in on the base. And what I find with the burnt umber and the ultramarine is that when you mix those in together, it's going to create a darker tone that is going to work really well with pretty much any color other than yellow in order to make those deep dark shadows. So when you get to your overpainting and you're like, all right, I'm trying to get that full range of values with a red or with a gray or with a blue, most students, the first thing that they go to is they reach out and they get the black. take the black and they cut it into that color, and black is going to ruin your colors faster than any other color. It makes it muddy, it makes it dingy. This type of color combination of going in with the brown and just a little bit of blue, when you mix it in, you do get that darkest tone, but if you come down and you just scoop up just a little bit of this. This is another trick that I like to do when I'm painting, is if I've got my mother tone, that mother load of tone right here, one thing that I'll do is I'll come in, and if I know I'm going to use a light and if I know I'm going to use a dark, I'll actually cut some of these colors in for the shadow itself, and I'll go in and I'll slowly start to cut that into my mother load just so I can start to get a darker tone of that color, and I can see what those color combinations are. Having, like, it's almost like I picture it in my mind as like a spider web. Your mother tone is the center of the web, and then as I'm painting, I'll bring in a little bit of this red over onto this side. I'll bring into a little bit of white into this side. So I really have all of the control that I need in my color mixing to make sure that the tones are exactly what I want it to be. So find the colors that you know you're going to be using a lot, and mix a large portion or a large chunk of those colors together. That way you've got enough color to be able to draw on as you're going in and continuing your painting from that base layer. So if this is going to be my darker edge, then I'm going to come in. If this is going to be my darker edge, then I'm going to come in, I'm going to cut a little bit of this in, and I'm going to drag this into the white to start to get my highlights of this color. So that way, as I'm doing this, really what I'm doing is I'm mapping out right on my palette, I'm mapping out my full range of values with those colors. I'm getting all of these colors pre-mixed, because the beauty about the use of oils is that it takes so long to dry that I have that freedom to be able to go in and get a variety of colors mixed through. Maybe I'll take just a little bit of that. Oh, that's going to be nice. It's going to give me an interesting purple. It gives me those variety of colors that I know I'm going to be using, that I'll be able to put down onto my overpainting itself. Now, once you get, if I'm like, all right, I'm just going to be focusing on this section right here. Here's my color palette and the colors that I'm going to be using. Notice I'm not using a whole bunch here. There's no reason to go in with the oils and like mix out a quarter size dollop of paint, because a quarter size dollop is going to be way more than you need. Finding that balance is really, really important. Ah, geez. That's really frustrating. I'm going to pause the recording because I just spilled turpenoid all over my desk. Sorry about that interruption. This is exactly why you always want to make sure that you're paying attention to what you're doing and not flailing your arms all over the place as you teach and as you paint. So once you get your tones mixed in, you've got all of your colors all mixed and ready to go. The process of going in and starting this overpainting is exactly the same process as with the underpainting. You want to go in and start with your base tone. I'm going to use the little bit of turpenoid that I have left in my container, and I'm going to come over to the side here, and I'm going to water. I'm just going to dilute this down so that it's a nice thin piece, or a nice thin layer of paint, that I'm going to come in and start painting with this directly over the top of my underpainting. Now what you're going to notice as you're doing this is this tone is going to start to come through, but really what's important is as this is layered out, as you've got that dilution coming through, you can see that over the top of the cardboard, it's starting to change color just a little bit, but you can absolutely see that underpainting, the darkest tone that you already laid down, you can see this starting to come through. That dark tone shines through the dilution of your underpainting so that you can continue to see exactly where you've mapped out your shadows. It makes that dark tone that you've already got laid down in your underpainting, it allows that shadow to come through on your overpainting itself. This is a really, really important tool, because as you go and you use this piece of underpainting that I can see just barely shining through on that medium tone, that is going to help me map in exactly where I want my shadows to come through. So it takes the guesswork out of what this painting is going to look like. If you just went in and you painted it over the top super, super thick, then you'd have to like try to remember exactly where did I put that darkest tone coming through. And then as you paint over the top, then you can start coming in and taking your mother lode and then start mixing that base tone directly into that shadowy tone. All I did is I put my base tone right here next to it. I took that dark tone that I've already got mixed up, and then I'm just coming in and I'm modeling that out. I'm using the terpenoid and the wetness of the oils that are coming through like this to get that nice even blend to come through. So I'll rinse this off. I'm going to come in and I'm going to work on this section here. So I'm going to come in with my base tone again. Let's just cut that out just a little bit. You don't want to dilute this too thin, not nearly as thin as what you were doing with your underpainting, but you don't want to layer it out super, super thick yet either. Remember, this is all about that fat over lean, making sure that your initial layers are very, very thin, and then as you slowly build it up, that's when you're going to come in and start using thicker layers. If you do thicker layers first and then thinner layers underneath it, what it's going to end up doing is it messes with your drying time, and it causes your thicker layers to end up peeling and cracking and coming apart. And that's definitely not what you want to happen with your paintings. It just undoes all of the work that you've already done. So really what you're using the underpainting for is a little bit of that value to come through on your overpainting, but you're really just using it as a map to be able to tell, all right, where are my darkest tones going to be? Can I see those dark tones as you're applying your overpainting over the top? And if you can see those dark tones, which is exactly what you want, then you go in and you start using those as a map to start putting those tones down with your overpaintings. The last, very, very last layer that you want to do is always going to be your lightest layer. Put down all of your darks first and then get that light layer as the final version, because you don't want your lightest tones that you've mixed as you're blending and modeling, you don't want those tones to get contaminated with any of the darker areas. You generally want your highlights to be as smooth and as clean as possible, which means those are going to be the places that you're going to lay tones down the very, very last thing. Is this making sense, folks? Okay, excellent. I'm going to pause this then.